Also, they didn't kind of, push other people out of the way and say me first. They allowed people to go in order. And that orderliness, of course, is what saved people.
So I want to talk about the accident that happened in Haneda, where this JAL plane crashed into this Coast Guard airplane, which apparently the last news says that it was a fault that wasn't supposed to be on the runway. What really impressed the online public was the fact that all the almost 400 passengers were saved, even though we saw the carcass of the airplane basically burst into flame right after it landed. How did they save themselves? That's the questions that was going around the net. Then we saw some videos from inside the plane, from the passengers themselves, and everybody looked quite calm, even though there were evidently from the window the flames coming out. But passengers seemed really quiet and just listening to the instructions given by the flight attendants. And apparently, this is the common knowledge. That's how they save themselves. Now, I wanted to ask how much this has to do with the Japanese culture itself. Because like I tweeted recently, as I was talking to a Chinese friend of mine, I'm going to read it half jokingly, that if it were Chinese passengers instead, there is no way anyone would have survived. And they would have run for their lives and with their baggages, with no care for the other passengers. And then I added, culture does matter. In emergencies like this, you would want to be with Japanese people.
This contrast that you give does strike a chord. I know that I struggle when I visit China because it's hard to even get on a subway train in China. People are so busy getting on the train that they don't allow the exiting passengers to get off the train first. It's just not part of how Chinese think, to be aware of the people around them. And by contrast, of course, in Japan, people are very aware of the people around them. I believe a number of scholars have referred to this as the contextual orientation of the culture. You put yourself in context, which means you always have to be aware of the people around you. Now, Japanese from a very young age, we're all, of course, given fire drills and emergency drills in school when we're young. I think probably less so as we become adults. Do we have this experience? A lot of people probably don't pay attention to the safety talk when the plane is first starting to take off. Maybe now people will start listening to those talks. We don't know. But I have observed that in Japan, people do take all of that stuff seriously, and they do practice the fire drill and the escape. And when the safety talk is on the airplane, they do look around them and find the closest exit and everything. And then they proceed to follow the instructions. I think also, as I said, the Japanese being contextual, they're always aware of the people around them, and they would follow the instructions of the stewardess. As we know from the news that we've heard, the stewardesses, the flight attendants, to use the more modern parlance, were using bullhorns because the sound system was out. They were making announcements and instructing people on what to do. I would be willing to make a bet with money that the flight attendants were already making those instructions, giving those instructions before the plane had even stopped. They knew that they were going to have to get their passengers off that plane, and they were already preparing before they could even open the doors, because that's what they're trained to do. And then everybody else followed the instructions. Also, they didn't kind of, push other people out of the way and say me first. They allowed people to go in order. And that orderliness, of course, is what saved people. You might have been the last person to be getting off the plane. You might have been looking around going, that's a lot of smoke and I'm really in trouble. But you know better than to knock 10 people out of the way so that you can get out first. You just take your turn and go as you go. And we have seen instances of that in other accidents outside of Japan as well, where passengers have saved other passengers at the cost of their own lives. But in Japan, it is, I think, because of the training and the drilling from a young age, and following instructions in the situation, trusting that somebody else knows better than you do what should be happening here, and being aware of the people around you and not doing anything to damage the people around you as you try to look after yourself. I think it's a combination of those three factors that enabled everybody to get safely off that plane.
I know you don't like extreme reductionist claims, but could we say then clearly that these passengers saved themselves because they were Japanese?
But I think that because they were Japanese, they had been drilled from a young age and had practiced. They were paying attention to the instructions of the flight attendant, and they were aware of the people around them. All of those things are Japanese cultural characteristics if you want to be that reductionist. You want to hope that other cultures would behave in that way in those contexts as well. But certainly those cultural behaviors explain a lot of what happened in this instance.